How's it going, everybody? I am Jay Buzz, and I'm going to start this podcast, even if I have to pull a Joey Styles and original ECW and do it by myself. I'm happy to be here tonight for the first time. I'm going to talk about some things in the gaming industry and just run down a couple of them, and hopefully, you guys are entertained by my perspective on some of these things because there's been a lot that has gone on over the course of the last week or so. And I actually invited some people to come talk about it, but I'm not sure if they got my invite. This is my first time really doing this. So this is a pilot episode. So hopefully we can only get better from here. So that being said, let me start off by saying that I've been a gamer pretty much all my life. I've been playing games since I was in kindergarten, probably even before kindergarten, and my first system was the Nintendo Entertainment System. And I've played a lot of systems since then, a lot of games, a lot of hours. I'm not the kind of person who cares about, proving to people what my gaming pedigree is. I just play games for fun. I'm the type of guy that will go back and play an old Sega game like Gargoyles, and nobody will even know where that game is even at now. So that's the way that I am, and that's the way that I've always been. So I love games, and I have kind of a different perspective on the gaming industry because I've seen it change over the course of the last 20 years or so, probably even longer. And a lot of people don't like where it's going, but I just want to give my thoughts very quickly. Hopefully you can listen to this, and it's very nice and short and compact, and it's listenable. It'll be pretty much PG as we try to keep our emotions in check as we talk about some of the stuff that the game developers are doing and the first parties are doing and the third parties are doing, and we're going to get into all of it. But first and foremost, this this first podcast was it was supposed to actually be about defending your company. And I have a couple friends of mine who are PlayStation fans. They're Sony fans. I got a couple friends of mine who are also big Nintendo fans. And I would say one of my friends I would classify him as a Nintendo fanboy, a person who, no matter what Nintendo does, there's always an excuse or a reason of why it's okay. And I wanted to have them on the show so I could kind of give them kind of a chance to air out why they think that what Nintendo is doing is okay and why what Sony is doing is okay. But I'll start with Sony because I'll get to the bigger news later. I'll start with Sony because Sony announced and it's pretty much confirmed that they're going to be making a different version of the PlayStation 4 for their virtual reality headset. And it's also supposed to be for the purpose of 4K and for better visuals and whatnot. And this project is going around on the internet. It's being known as a PlayStation 4 Neo for now, I guess. And the funny thing to me about this is nobody seems to think that this is a big issue when Sony does this. Now, I was one of the people who originally bought the Sony PlayStation back when it first came out. And back then when Sony was getting their foot into the door, they did everything pretty much right. They got the third parties on board. They made sure that they made great first party games. They made sure that they were a very gamer friendly company. And over the years, from the PS1 into the PS2 and into the PS3, it's kind of like people have kind of just let them do whatever it is that they're doing. But I stopped being kind of a Sony fan in a sense because I still owned the PS2 and the PS3. But I stopped kind of being kind of a Sony apologist around the PlayStation 2 because I kind of liked the system. I did like the system. I didn't like the controller. A lot of people did. I didn't like the controller. It did have some good games on it and some awesome games on it and awesome third party. It was never a problem finding games on the system. But I wanted Sony to innovate things. And I always thought that what they did is they always just rehashed things and they made sequels to things. So I was always the kind of person who wanted to get the new gaming experience, the next big thing, or the next thing that was going to push the market. So when that generation came up with the PlayStation 2 and with the Xbox, the original Xbox, I chose to have an Xbox. And I actually liked my Xbox more than I liked my PS2. I liked the games on my Xbox more than I liked the games that were on the PS2. And for me, that was the experience that I liked in that generation. But ever since then, Sony's kind of done things, and everything that Sony does is kind of okay. You know, their online isn't as good as Microsoft's, but people let them, you know, they get a pass for that. They don't give out free games when you subscribe to their service, really, but they get a pass for that. Now they're coming out with another system in the middle of a console cycle, and that seems to be okay with people. And for some reason, these Sony fans, because I'm guessing these people got to be all under the age of 25. They don't understand how this wrecks consumer confidence. Because let me explain something to you. When I was a kid, my favorite system was the Sega Genesis, and I was a Sega person. I love Sega, and it's actually funny that I had a PlayStation 1 because I had a Sega Saturn as well. But the Saturn was actually my favorite console of those two. But Sega was my favorite company, but Sega did something during the generation with the Genesis that kind of messed them up. And what they started to do is they started to add hardware. And they used to say that it was only for people who wanted to upgrade the hardware. You know, one of my friends who's supposed to be on tonight, his reasoning for why he thinks it's okay for Sony to make this is he says that the people who have 4K TVs and want better graphics and better resolution and whatnot, they should at least be given the option to be able to go out and find this system so that they can play their games and that the games look better. And so that sounds good, and you know, that sounds good to me. But there's only one thing that I'm really thinking about when it comes to all of this. I'm thinking of it from not just a fan perspective of a person who plays games, but I think of it from the developer's perspective. Because when you create so many different forms of hardware, that's more work for the developers who are usually making multi-platform games. That's more work for them to do, to have to figure out how to port that game over to that particular console. For instance, back in the generation with the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo, those companies, meaning Nintendo and Sega, they made games that were more so specifically for their hardware and for their controllers. And basically what the third parties had to do is they kind of had to port them to both systems, but they knew the strengths and weaknesses of each, and they could kind of work their way around it. But each system had its own nuances. You know, people like the Super Nintendo controller. The Super Nintendo was a little bit more powerful, had a better color scheme. But for the Sega Genesis, a lot of people like the sports games on the Sega Genesis more. They like the soundboard a little bit more on the Sega Genesis. They like the fact that the Sega Genesis did innovative things even well ahead of its time, such as things like Sega Channel and adding different versions to games. I want to say Sega was probably one of the first companies to kind of do kind of a DLC type thing with the game Sonic and Knuckles. And when you can add Sonic or Knuckles to Sonic 2, Sonic 3, and you could basically play as him in those games, I think that was kind of one of the first unique forms of DLC. But my point is, third-party companies already had to spend enough time making games, important games, to both systems, and they have to learn the hardware. Now, in the middle of this generation, you have two systems. Then you have another system that's coming out, which we'll talk about later. And then you have PlayStation, Sony, and Microsoft now saying that they're going to change their schemes, and they're going to change their hardware in a sense and upgrade their hardware in the middle of this console generation so that it can be better. Now, a lot of people would say, well, why is that a big deal? The big deal is, for me, is because if you can develop on one, which saves time and money, why would you keep developing for all of them? So, for instance, what's going to keep developers after this PlayStation 4 Neo comes out from saying, you know what, we would rather just make this game on the PlayStation 4 Neo because it's just easier, the graphics are better, it's easier for us to develop for, we don't have to split up our teams, and we don't have to put that much money into it if we do it that way. So what we're going to do, we're going to make this game basically to run on the PlayStation 4 Neo. Now, I'm not a technical guy. I'll be honest. I'm very honest about that. I'm not a technical guy in terms of knowing coding and things like that. But I'm thinking, and I wish I could get some fellow YouTubers on here who are better in the technical aspect of things. I'm thinking that when you are developing for that system, like the PlayStation 4 Neo, you're going to have to take the time to learn the hardware, and there's going to be nuances in that hardware that's going to be different from the original PS4 hardware. So they're going to run into some problems, I think, when trying to downscale the game back down for it to play on the original PlayStation 4. And I think that when they come out with this new Xbox, or with this new upgradable Xbox, if they come out with one, I think they're going to run into the same issue. And I think that what that does is that messes with the consumer confidence. Because why should we buy your product if now you make another product and you're not going to devote all of your time and your resources to giving us the high quality that we bought the system for? And that's the reason why a lot of people have such an issue now with what Nintendo's doing. But I'll get into that just a little bit more after I talk about the Neo for just a little bit longer. But Sega did this. They came out with 32X. They came out with the Sega CD. That was all for more power. And what it did, it kind of began to frustrate consumers, because even though my friend has a point when he says only certain people are going to buy the upgraded version, it also frustrates the developers as well. And it frustrates the developers to a point of where now they don't believe in what it is that you're doing. So they're going to stop making games. And if you don't believe that this is true, look at your history. Look at Sega. Sega did the same thing with the Sega Saturn. They made the Saturn kind of difficult to program for. I shouldn't say difficult, but it was different. It was different to program for. It actually had some games that ran better on it than on the PlayStation 1. I'm thinking about stuff like Marvel vs. Capcom and Tomb Raider and things like that. But the issue with Sega at that point is that they never were committed to their one product and just putting out the best groups of games that they could come out with. And I think that's what PlayStation has become. They've become kind of a company where they're just looking at their specs and the hardware, and they become, and I hate to use this as a term because I don't like using other people's terms, but they're graphic junkies. I think they're graphic junkies, and I think that they're just looking at ways to show, quote unquote, more power, more resolution, and frame rates, and this and that. And I don't think they're focusing as much on the quality and the quantity of their exclusive titles. And then I think that overall hurts Sony's practices. I think that hurts the 40 million people who pretty much have already bought a PS4, who now, if they do have a 4K TV, they're going to have to find some way to upgrade that way. I think that if they really wanted to just upgrade it so that people could, play the game on their 4K TVs and it would be better, I would think that they could just make a converter box or something, some sort of accessory that would do that. But to me, the fact that they're not just making a accessory to cause it to be able to be hooked up to 4K TVs and whatnot, that tells me that this is going to be new hardware, in a sense, kind of a PS4 more so on like steroids. It's going to be newer hardware. It's going to be stuff that's going to improve the computing power. And when you make games for a platform, and this is just what I'm saying, most developers, when they develop games, even though this has changed kind of a lot more in recent years, you kind of make it on a native platform. There's a native platform that game is meant to run on. Like like when you make a game, this system was meant for this game. And when we made this game, we built it for this console. But nowadays, most of the developers, they develop stuff for PCs, and then they kind of have to downscale back down to get to the consoles. So now you don't really have that. But now what we're going to have is them separating the consoles, making the developers develop and use more time to develop these games, which is going to lead to longer game droughts, I think, and it's going to frustrate the consumers just like how Sega did. And the bad thing about Sega is even though the Saturn was a good platform, I thought they gave up on it, and then when they finally got things right with the Dreamcast and when they were committed, they had frustrated third parties so much to the point of they didn't even develop games. They didn't even put their games on their system. They just shunned it, and it was probably one of the most frustrating things for me in my lifetime, because the Dreamcast for me was probably like one of my favorite systems. I thought the Dreamcast was a brilliant system with games, and I thought that the Dreamcast, if they would have been able to get the third party that they needed, they could have probably made that console generation, which is one of my favorites, probably one of the best console generations to date. But Sega had frustrated the consumers with, releasing the Saturn early with a surprise release date, and then saying that the Saturn wasn't their future and making the hardware hard to develop for. So by the time that they finally got it right, it was too late, and it was sad. And I don't want that to happen to these companies now. That being said, I think I went on a little bit too long because my partners in crime haven't come here yet. But in this generation, though, so far, I haven't really seen anything that, and this is me admitting this, I haven't seen anything in this generation that would wow me and that would get me to the point of where I want to buy any of these other consoles. I've been close to buying an Xbox One a couple times, but now I'm like, if they're going to upgrade the Xbox One, there's no point in me buying it until they come out with the newer, bigger, better thing. Same goes for the PS4. I actually do have a Wii U, and I bought a Wii U because I usually buy systems about 2 years after they come out, because I want to see what games that they have on it, and I like to play older games, and that's what the Wii U offered. The Wii U offered the Nintendo putting some of their old Nintendo games and Super Nintendo games on, and I knew that they would eventually put the 64 games on, and I was hoping they would put some of the GameCube games on there, and they started to do that. And I have a lot of old games on my Wii U hard drive, even though it's nowhere big enough, so that's why I have a Wii U and no other system. But I haven't felt the need to buy any of those systems because I just been disappointed so far with this generation. There's broken games, all these remakes and remasters I don't really need, and I haven't seen really anything that's really worth it for me to go out and buy these systems. Now, with that being said, I will buy one of them at the end of this year. It'll probably be an Xbox One when it is upgraded, because I've always wanted to play stuff like the Master Chief Collection, so I could play the Halo 2 online with the maps and everything. And I've always liked the fact that Microsoft they're now on this new tip of where they're trying to make it about the games again, which is what I think companies should be doing. But with that being said, those are my thoughts on the PlayStation 4 Neo, and I just hope that people hold Sony to the same standard that they held Sega to. Because if this were somebody like Nintendo or Microsoft, people would be talking trash, I think, about, how could we buy your system and then you come out 2 years later and say that you're going to come out with another system that's an upgraded one. Is that the same thing? I don't want it to be like a thing where it's like the Nintendo 3DS XL, where they make it for a specific purpose and only certain games can be put on it, and then, and then you buy it and then there's not enough games on it because the developers don't want to split the time up to go and put the games on that. That's just that's a money loser. And for some reason, I don't know why Sony thinks they can go back to just losing money again, but I think that's what will definitely happen if they pull this off and if they're not careful about how they do this. So, all right. Next, as I move on, and I'm moving on very quickly because I want to be done. I want to make this very listenable to you drive to work and very short so you can get to the point. Finally, after all these months and weeks of speculation, Nintendo finally came out and they announced that they are going to be coming out with their new console, the NX, next year in March. This came kind of not as a shock to people that the system was coming out, but the release date kind of put people off. And I think the reason why people are kind of upset about the release date is because, and I talked about Sega, and I talked about their commitment to supporting their console because they did a better job of that with the Dreamcast. But Nintendo has not done a good job in supporting the Wii U. And I have a Wii U, so people who want to, the fanboys who just think that everything that Nintendo does is fine, that's not me. Nintendo has done a horrible job of supporting the Wii U. Me as a gamer, I like to play sports games. I can't even play sports games on my Wii U because you want to know why? They don't have third-party support. They don't even get games like Madden and NHL and NBA 2K. They don't get any of those kind of games. They don't get any of those kind of games. They get none of them. And the only games that you get is every 8 to 9 months you might get a major first-party release, and that's all we've been getting, and that has not been acceptable. I remember my friend used to talk about and brag about the Nintendo seal of quality. Well, this system, even though the games, when they have come out, they have been good, there's not been enough of them. So I say they have been lacking in the quality of their support of this system. I have a kind of a issue, and I'm just going to backtrack it here. My issue with the Wii U is not the fact that it was underpowered, because I'm not a graphics junkie like most people. I care about gameplay. I can play a game if it's good, even if the graphics are bad. That's why, like I said earlier, I can go back and play Gargoyles on the Sega Genesis, or I can go back and play Prince of Persia on the original Xbox. I can play Splinter Cell on the original Xbox. I can go back to PS1 and play Parappa the Rapper. I can go back all the way to the Super Nintendo and play Donkey Kong Country. I can go back to the original Nintendo and play Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game. I can do that. I don't really need for there to be, realistic graphics and this and that. That's not me. But what I do want to have a choice of the variety of games that I'm able to play. And the Wii U right now doesn't offer that. The Wii U doesn't offer the chance for you to really get into first-person shooters on a yearly basis. They don't offer you the chance to play sports games. That's a huge issue. They don't offer you the chance to play any of the multiplats. That's another huge issue. When they came out with the system, with another kind of a gimmick, which is the gamepad, which, as much as I like the gamepad for certain things, I usually play most of these games when I'm not forced to play with the gamepad. I play most of the games that are on the Wii U on the Pro controller, which I think is the best controller. Um, and it's all a part of what I believe, and this is what I'm gonna get into. And I know that the Nintendo fanboys are gonna be on here hating, but that's okay. And I'm gonna talk about this in detail. It leads me to the conclusion, looking at how Nintendo is not coming out with games this year for the Wii U and for consoles. Um, it's come to my attention. This is my conclusion. And I think that this is a fact. And when you look at their practices, you can't prove me wrong. Nintendo doesn't care about Western gamers. I'm going to say it again. Nintendo does not care about Western gamers. Now, my friend said something that was interesting, and he was right. You know, he's right about this. Nintendo, since it is a Japanese-based company, they more so are focusing on the handheld because most people in Japan, when they go to work, they have to sit on the subway and on the trains for a half hour or an hour, and they come from outside of the big city. So they have a lot of time where they're not at home and where they're sitting around on their commute to get home where they play games. And that's why they support the 3DS more than they do the Wii U. Now, I understand that, and that's all well and good if you're Japanese and if that's why you have a 3DS. But in Western culture, this is just a fact. In Western culture, most gamers, I'm not talking about the hardcores, most gamers are going to have a console and they're going to play their major titles on a console. They're going to play the Maddens on a console. They're going to play the Call of Duties on a console. They're going to play the NBA 2Ks on a console. They're going to play the Batman Arkham Knights on a console. Why? Because people over in Western culture, in America, in North America mostly, they play their games at home in front of the television, whether it be them having a gaming rig that they hook up to a TV. That's what people do. They play games on a console. And the whole purpose of a console is so that it's not like a PC where you have to constantly install this and go through the virus control with this, or you have to upgrade this. It's so that you can put in the game and play the game. So that's what people in the West want to do. That's what people in North America want to do. They want to pick up the controller and be able to play the game within 5 to 10 minutes. I'm all for games that you have to learn and kind of develop a skill at, but for the most part, most people want to be able to pick up the controller, figure out what to do, and within 10, 15 minutes know how to play that game. Now, Nintendo, this is just from what I see. These are just facts. I'm going to prove this to you. Nintendo to me does not care about Western gamers. Why is that? Because number one, look at their support for the 3DS and look at their support for the Wii U. You mean to tell me that you couldn't get third-party companies to come out with your major sports games like your FIFA and your Maddens and your NBA 2Ks and your Call of Duties? You couldn't make a deal with third-party companies to make those games for the last 2 years or so, but the Xbox 360 and PS3 could still get those games. I know now. I know what the smart fans are going to say. They're going to say, "Oh well, those have a higher install base, and you gotta develop for those because they're guaranteed to be on there." Okay, you're right, but when you want to sell a console and when you're selling it for $300, you need to show people that you're committed to giving them quality on the system. So they should have worked out some sort of deal to get somebody else, whether it be their own team of people, over to these third parties to make ports of these games, even if they're bad ports like they've been making, even if they're bad ports. All right? I know people are gonna be like, oh well, they've been making bad ports. That's why they're in the position. That's why they're in the position that they're in. Yeah, they've been making bad ports, but I think if they would have continued to do that, that would have shown that they care somewhat about the Western gamer. Also, another reason why I don't think they care about Western gamers, they constantly do not do what the consumer says to do. There's still no voice chat. There's still no really good internet-based community really for Nintendo in terms of how to set up games and matches and whatnot. They don't give you voice chat. They don't give you any of those things. The online is still a work in progress. They show you that right there. That right there should tell you they don't care about Western gamers, because that's how most people in North America are going to play online games. They're going to voice chat while they're playing Call of Duty or while they're playing some sort of first-person shooter or some sort of team-based shooter. They're going to do something, and they're going to be able to talk to their teammate. But Nintendo doesn't even give you the options to be able to take it off. Why? Because they don't care about Western gamers. They care about the Japanese gamer more. Also, I'm going to get into this last point. This is also another reason of why I don't think they care about Western gamers. What does Nintendo of America actually do? I'm gonna let the fanboys write in the chat and tell me that. What does Nintendo of America actually do? What does Reggie actually do? I don't see him do anything. They don't give them games that they actually suggest to Nintendo and say, hey, look, you know what? We need to develop this game and get this game out. They don't do that. They don't look at the market over here and say, you know what? In order for us to have a good system, we probably want to bring, on some third parties to at least make the Call of Duty games and the sports games and the major multi-platform games. We at least want to do that. But Nintendo of America does nothing. They do nothing. They don't give us the controller that we want. They don't give you guys the games that you want. You guys have been asking for a Metroid for a long time. There's still no Metroid. And then the Metroid that you got, where did it go? It went to the 3DS, and it's not even a real Metroid game. Then, I won't even get into that. I know people are already mad about that. Then, they have the nerve. This is what they have the nerve to do. They have the nerve now to come out and announce that this new NX system is going to be coming out next year. Well, that's well and good. Okay? That's well and good. But then they come out and say that the only thing that they're going to have. Let me write this down before I lose my point. They come out and say that they're not going to have the NX at E3. I mean, E3 is Western gaming paradise. But where is Nintendo going to be? They're going to be there, but they're going to be there with one game that we've already known about for years, for the last 3 years, and that's Zelda U. That's Zelda U. So they're not even going to show off the system to the Western gamers who want to see this system to come back to inspire more consumer confidence. What does that tell you? It tells you that they don't care about Western gamers. That's the only conclusion. That's the only conclusion that I can come to when I look at Nintendo. Nintendo doesn't listen to their fans. They give you a Star Fox game with these bad motion controls. Fans didn't want that. The fans wanted a Star Fox game that would be multiplayer, that would be online, which is better graphics, kind of like 64. Make a Star Fox 64 updated version, make it online. That would be what they want. Have they made that? Nope. Why don't you make a Metroid game online? Nope, they won't do that. Oh, why don't you guys make a Pokemon MMO online for the consoles? Nope. And I know people are like, Pokemon is a handheld game. Yeah, I know that, but their business sense, you would think, would kick in and say, you know what, we should do this one time just to get sales. But I won't get into that this podcast. That'll be the next one. But this to me tells me they don't care about Western gamers. They don't give you the games that you want. We get terrible ports of the games. And when they come out with a new system, they leave the people who have already bought the Wii U out to dry, because have they announced any new titles for the Wii U this year? Nope. Are we going to be getting more games this year on our Wii U to at least send it out? Nope. Now, I might be wrong, and I'm hoping that I'm wrong. I'm hoping I'm wrong. I'm hoping that Nintendo proves me wrong, and they come out in the next couple of weeks with some type of Nintendo Direct, and they say, all right, we're gonna make our fans who have bought a Wii U, we're gonna send them off right by giving them at least 2 or 3 games, to send them off with. But I don't think that they're gonna do that. You want to know what they say? You know what? You guys bought the system. Too bad. You'll just have to wait on us. I've never seen a company that all the time tells the consumer, we know what you want, but we're going to give you what we think you should have. Nintendo, to me, has the Vince McMahon mentality. And that mentality is this. Vince McMahon says it best. He says it like this. When it comes to wrestling, he tells the fans, he asks the fans, do you people know what you want? And the fans say yes. And then he says, no, you don't know what you want. So it's my job to tell you what you want. And that's what Nintendo is. And Nintendo is having the same effect that wrestling, that the WWE is having. People losing interest. People not as excited about the product. People don't have any belief that the product will get better. And that's what Nintendo's done. Why? All because Nintendo doesn't care about Western gamers. They don't care. They simply just don't care. You asked them to come out with voice chat in that Splatoon game. Did they listen? Nope. Did they even give you an option to do it? Nope. Now, to play advocate here, all right? And this is what I'm hoping that Nintendo does. Maybe this is their reasoning for why they don't have the NX at E3. Maybe it's something like this, all right? Are you ready for this theory? Because you're never going to hear this theory anywhere else, all right? Because I'm not going to talk about the release date in March. I think it should have been sooner, but hey. People get their tax returns. So in the West, people will have money, but I don't see a reason for them to want to buy their console, based on what they've been doing. I don't see a reason for them to want to buy their console, but that's a different story. But this is my theory. This is a theory that I'm hoping that Nintendo proves me wrong with, and maybe their leadership has gotten better, because, Nintendo of America is the most inept division, useless, worthless division of any gaming company I've ever seen. But maybe they thought this. This is the theory. Are you ready for it? Maybe Nintendo said, you know what? We're not going to bring the NX to E3, but what we will do, we'll bring a game that we're going to put on the NX at E3. And since third-party developers feel like they can't compete with our games, we'll let them show the fans how their games look on our system. I know that's holding out hope for some Nintendo fanboys. Maybe they're thinking that. Maybe they're thinking something that brilliant in their mind. Maybe they're thinking, you know what? Let's get EA and let's get Capcom and let's get all these companies. Even though people are mad at Capcom right now, and I understand why. Let's get all these different companies now. Let's get the Bethesdas. Let's get them. Let's get all these companies who have not been making games for us, and let's tell them, look, you guys can develop some of your games on the NX, and we want you to show them off at this E3. We're only going to show off Zelda, which people have known has been coming out for years. So that's not going to really overshadow your games because people know about this. But we're going to give you the chance to put your games front and center on our console before we start releasing our big hitters. Maybe that's what they're doing. Maybe they're talking to EA, and EA has a couple games that they're going to show for them. Maybe the Mass Effect 4 game will be shown off on the NX at E3. Maybe there will be new partnerships that will be announced at E3, and maybe that's what they're doing. Maybe, but do I have faith that that's what they're thinking? That's their business sense? No, I don't have faith in it. I don't have faith that that's their business sense. And unfortunately for Nintendo right now, they really have to start winning back consumer confidence. Because right now they're in a position just like how Sega was, except Sega did it to themselves, but Nintendo's also doing it to themselves by not adapting to their market. And maybe they don't want to adapt to the market because maybe they snub, maybe they turn their nose up at the West and say, you know what, those Americans, those Canadians, those people over there, they're not going to dictate to us what we're going to do. We're going to dictate to them. And maybe that's why they do what they do. But it all confirms my theory. And I dare a fanboy to prove me wrong. I dare somebody to prove me wrong that Nintendo doesn't care about Western gamers. They'll make money off of you, sure, but they don't care about you. Their games aren't marketed towards you. They're not. Otherwise, we would be getting better games, more games. Now, I'm supposed to be signing off in just a little bit, but let me tell you something about Nintendo and why this is very disappointing for a lot of Nintendo fans. Because I grew up in the era of where, as I move around in my seat, I grew up in the era of where the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo battled it out. And when you had one console, you understood that you just were going to, there were certain games that you just weren't going to have because they weren't going to be on that console. But you respected it because you also knew that you had games coming out for your system that they didn't have. But you looked across at the other side and you would say, man, you know what? That game I would really like to play. When I was growing up, I had the Sega Genesis, and one of my friends, he was the only one out of probably about 10 of us. He's the only one who had a Super Nintendo. So we had a Sega Genesis, and he had a Super Nintendo. Now, did we talk trash whenever the games like the Vectormans and the Comic Zones and the Sonic 2s and Sonic 3s and the X-Men games? Did we talk trash on them when all those games came out for the Sega Genesis? Yes. When the Shinobis came out, yeah, we talked trash on them. But he talked trash on us whenever they would come out with games like Donkey Kong Country and Star Fox and F-Zero. And we would be like, man, you know what? We need to come over to your house and play them games. And Nintendo used to have it to the point of where You actually were jealous if you didn't have a Super Nintendo. Even though I had a Sega Genesis because I liked the sports games, because the sports games were for some reason always better on the Sega. I have no idea why that was. The sports games would be better, and they had a little bit more of the games that I would like to play. Um, but one thing about the Super Nintendo and about Nintendo in that era, which is what they need to probably try to replicate now, Nintendo gave you their first party games, and they were great. But one of the things that they also gave you, they gave you the third party games as well. And they even gave you some third party exclusives. Like the Final Fantasies were only going to be on Super Nintendo, or on the Super Famicom, as they would call it back in the day. The Chrono Triggers were only on Super Nintendo. You know, stuff like that. They had those gems. They had those gems of games, even back then, that made you kind of wish that you had a Super Nintendo. This is back when you're a kid, and if you're from the type of background that I grew up in, you only got one system. You didn't get two systems. You picked one and you lived with your purchase, and you hoped that one of your friends had the other one. And I was lucky to have a friend who had the other ones. But when you saw them get the Super Street Fighter 2 turbos and all that, you would be jealous. You'd be like, man, I wish I had that. And when they saw you get the Streets of Rage, they were jealous. But what's missing now in gaming, and this is probably just an old man ranting, game developers don't make those kind of games anymore now, especially at the frequency that they made it back then. I know games cost more to develop now. I know that, but they don't give you those experiences that are for that console and that define that generation of the console like they did back then. You can look in every generation of gaming, 5th gen, 6th gen, 7th gen. You can find games on every system that would define that system. When you think of the original Xbox, what do you think of? You think of Halo. When you think of the original PlayStation, you think of the arcade games, the Tekkens, the Ridge Racers. When you think of the Genesis, you think of the Sonic 2s, the Vector Mans, the Comic Zones. When you think of Super Nintendo, you think of the Super Mario Worlds, the F-Zeros, the Metroids, all those games. And it's like now in these generations as they're coming up, now it's kind of like when you think of these systems, what can you really define? What is really going to define these consoles? What's really going to define them? Xbox is starting to get their own games, which is good. PlayStation, they were in a drought. They're starting to come out with some of their games, I think, this year. You have the No Man's Sky coming out, but that's on PC. Really, none of these systems for me have given me a reason to buy them. And why should not I just buy a PC? Because if you don't want to think that what I'm saying is true, even if you're a Sony fan, all right, and you're thinking he's just hating on Sony talking about the Neo, he's just hating. All right, if you think that I'm hating and I'm just making this up, I'm going to show you how a game will suffer when developers have to develop for all these different consoles, and they will make a version of the game that will not be able to go above one because of all the different systems. And one game that is a example of that is Batman Arkham Knight. Arkham Knight on the PC should be great, right? But it's not. And you want to know why it's not? Because they were developing the game for consoles, and it suffered because they couldn't put the game on the PC and cause it to run at a higher resolution the way that they could have. And that's why PlayStation 4 owners who are currently PS4 owners and don't have the Neo. I think you guys are going to get the short end of the stick. I hope I'm wrong, but I think that's where it's going. I think the industry is changing, and a lot of people don't like where it's changing too. But I think that us as gamers, we have to be responsible and take the responsibility for how third parties are doing this, for how these companies are doing this. They're doing this because we're still buying their stuff. We're still allowing them to sell us broken games. We're still buying different versions of the same system. They couldn't get away with doing stuff like that. Otherwise, they would be out of business. But the fanboys and the console fanboys, they're keeping these people afloat. And if you want the gaming industry to change, you guys have to demand better. Nintendo fans have to demand better. Sony fans got to demand better. Microsoft fans demanded better, and guess what they're getting now? Better. As much as I talk about the Xbox One, the one thing I will say about Microsoft fans is that they demanded better, and what are they getting now? They're getting better. I want the Nintendo fans to do the same thing, and I want the Sony fans to do the same thing. Let me know what you think. First show, apologize for the audio and none of my co-hosts coming to save me, but hopefully I'll do better next week. Signing off.